Hey there, it's Dan and you're watching The Salty Sea, and I'm here to show you a sweet casual deck for a low budget. While I love Commander, the beauty of that format has drained a little for me over the years as it's gotten more attention from the mothership, so I'm going to spend some time on this channel over the next few months highlighting other great ways to play the game casually. You'll see more budget kitchen table decks as well as a video or two on cube design. So now you know I'm here to play casual games. Let's talk Standard. Over the last few months ever since the banning of Omnath, Kroxa decks have emerged as one of the sweetest, most fun play styles to play in Standard. Here I've got on the screen an example of Paulo Vitor Rosa's Rakdos list that he did very well in at an MPL tournament. And what I love about these type of decks is that they pressure the opponent's life total and the opponent's resources at the same time. It's a really fun playstyle because you get to play a beatdown deck, but you've got real tricks. You get to interact with your opponent and slap them around at the same time. The graveyard recursion angle also gives you a nice little puzzle to solve too. Now, you can actually play a similar playstyle using an oldie but a goodie in Blightning. And another advantage of Blightning decks is that while that Kroxa deck of Paulo Vitor's cost $240, you can make a Blightning deck for pretty cheap and play it on your kitchen table. So, Bloodbraid Elf and Blightning used to strike fear into the hearts of Jace players everywhere, because it's a perfect card for pressuring an opponent's resources and life total at the same time. Now, as a build-around, it does ask different things of you than Kroxa. Kroxa asks you to play some self-mill setup in the early game, whereas if you're going to play Blightning on curve, you really want to have an aggressive creature already on the board. Then you want to be able to keep coming back so that you exhaust whatever resources they have left. That's why I've put 8 recursive aggro 1-drops in the deck with 2 Scrap Heap Scroungers on the board. And then I play more discard and burn to reinforce the strengths that Blightning already has. So let's focus in on the burn package. Bonecrusher Giant and Blightning are great because they fill multiple roles. They take out life totals and they grab card advantage at the same time. Blightning does it by literally taking their cards away, and then Bonecrusher does it by acting as a removal and a threat all at once. There's a reason it's been a standard staple ever since it was printed, and it's not very expensive either. Lightning Bolt and Bump in the Night are just the 2 most efficient burn spells for budget players. Bolt is still cheap at under $2 each, and anyone still playing kitchen table Magic should probably grab 4 when they can. Bump in the Night is also really efficient, and the fact that they come back makes this deck just a terror for control decks to handle. Now the other side of Blightning is the discard part. And while this section has a lot less to say, it's just as important. You just have 9 discard spells in the deck, so your idea is to just strip the opponent's hand and make it hard for them to keep up with your creatures. Hymn to Torok is one of the most powerful spells ever printed, and you can pick them up for 50 cents each. Note that getting 2-for-1s is really the name of the game here. So 2 copies of Duress are still here for picking things up early in case your opponent is playing combo, but really we're looking at these 2-for-1s in Blightning and Hymn. Now the classic weakness of discard is that it lets your opponents draw out of it. So we have a really low to the ground beatdown suite to pressure life totals. Every creature is cheap, 3 mana or below, and every creature has built-in card advantage. There's also some nice synergies here with what else we're doing. Asylum Visitor is a Dark Confidant if you manage to empty your opponent's hand with all your discard. But even if they draw too many cards for that to work, don't worry. With such a low curve, this deck actually gets hellbent quickly. You can just spend all the cards out of your hand within turn 4. So you're still going to be able to turn on the card draw. And then Sin Prodder is a classically overlooked card because the right cards just didn't exist while it was in Standard. Your opponent can choose to pay life to dump the card in your yard instead of letting you draw, which is an inherent weakness. But it does combo very nicely by making that decision much more difficult if you have cards that recur out of your graveyard. And that's why we're running Dread Wanderer and Gutter Bones, so that both our 1-drops can come back from the graveyard. Bump in the Night does too. And then if you really want, you can board in Scroungers to up the consistency even more. But sure, while Scrap Heap Scrounger is a better card, Lupine Prototype is a sweet little one-off in this deck. The deck is great at activating Asylum Visitor, and Prototype is sort of the Tarmogoyf to Asylum Visitors, Bob. You don't want multiples, because they do nothing for the first 3 turns, but a 2 power 5/5 is just better than anything you can get at this price. Now let's look at the mana base really quickly. There's a number of pretty cheap untapped dual cycles that are starting to come out as Wizards experiments with what they can create. So here we get 7 duels for about $15 for this deck. And one thing that's nice is that Foreboding Ruins actually comes in untapped if Smoldering Marsh is in your hand. Now, Marsh doesn't cast your 1-drops on turn 1, but that's okay, that's part of living the budget Magic life, but also you still have 13 untapped turn 1 black sources, so your chances of casting a 2-power 1-drop on turn 1 are actually pretty good. Here we can see the wonderful tool that's online, which is called MTG on Curve, which lets you know exactly what your chances are. And as you can see, the 13 sources is actually doing a great job here, and that you can play Bump in the Night, Dread Wanderer, Duress, Gutter Bones, all of your 1 mana, 1 black spells at about a 96% clip, which is just excellent. Hymn to Torok is really the only concern here. Now, being 80% to cast it on turn 2 still isn't bad, but the number jumps up really quickly because Smoldering Marsh activates on turn 3. Now, that lets you do something like play Hymn to Torok and then also bolt something on turn 3 when Smoldering Marsh comes online. Sometimes Hymn is actually better late anyway, since even though it's random discard, you give yourself a better chance of nabbing their most important cards if you play it a turn later. It's also important to note with this mana base that Smoldering Marsh coming in on turn 3 is a big part of why our red cards, we're really only planning to play them on turn 3, so that's why we have Blightning, Bone Crusher, and Sin Prodder, but we aren't playing some of the really powerful red 2-drops or 1-drops that exist. Now, a quick note on the sideboard. Scrapheap Scrounger is one of the best anti-control creatures you'll ever see. If you're playing someone with a bunch of removal, it's going to be a better choice than Lupine Prototype or the 3rd Sin Prodder. Then, Bloodchief's Thirst is a super powerful recent printing for removal, and it can replace Duress if you're playing a deck with a ton of creatures. After that, we've just got a sort of random pile of super cheap hate cards in the board here that you can play if you're expecting something like a graveyard deck, or an opposing burn deck, or maybe an artifact deck. So what does this deck look like when you actually shuffle it up and play it? Well, like any interactive deck, it's going to depend on what your opponent is doing. Now, casual budget decks on this channel are going to be $50 budget with the Legacy ban list. My playgroup held a game night with this format a while back, and we found it to be a really well-balanced format for casual play. It's great for playing sort of webcam style with your friends, or you can, hopefully organize a game night once the pandemic is lightened up. So then, if your opponent is playing with the same restriction, the cards here on the left are going to be usually the 5 most powerful spells that exist in the format. There's plenty of other cards at this power level, but other than Exhume, none of them are this cheap. And the first thing that pops up when you look at this list is that this deck actually plays 2 of these 5 cards. So it competes really well in this space as long as you're playing a fair game. Now, this kind of applies if you're just playing against your buddy's standard deck too. The Disruption and Clock in this deck is just very, very powerful. So it's going to be rare that you face something up until about modern power level that just blows the doors off you. Now, that said, you don't have a big scary threat that just shuts your opponent out of the game, because cards in these colors that do that tend to either have a really high mana cost or just a really high dollar cost, like Kroxa does. So you're going to need to play aggressively to shut the door in case your opponent is doing something broken in the late game using powerful mythics that just cost something that's way out of your budget. But if they're trying to remove your creatures and trade 1 for 1, it's going to be really hard on them because you've got recursion and a ton of reach, so they have to actually finish you off before they can consider you locked out of the game. So this deck is always going to be pretty good against combo, aggro, and control. Your real struggles are going to be against anything that can gain life, block, and draw cards at the same time. So recent printings like Uro, Omnath, and Oko are going to be really tough for a deck like this to beat, but those printings were ridiculous anyway, and there's a reason that all three of those cards got banned. And so again, you're going to be in great shape to have really fun, tight, close games against a wide variety of competitive or kitchen table type decks. Now, a lot of really fun kitchen table games take place in multiplayer. And while this type of strategy is a lot better in 60 card 1v1 formats than it is in multiplayer ones, you can absolutely take it into a chaos game if you want to do that. Now you might want to change it up. So I've suggested two changes here. One is Bone Dragon and the other is Soul Shatter. They're both sort of recent rare printings that never found their home in competitive formats and so are still pretty cheap. Bone Dragon perfectly fits the theme of recursive threats. Flipping this off Sin Prodder, it just puts your opponents in a really tight bind. Someone's either going to take 5 or you're going to draw a card, and then even if they do take 5, you can often get it back pretty quickly, especially if you're fueling Sin Prodder or just playing your burn spells out of your hand. Now, Soul Shatter is really nice here also because it kills the types of big threats that Bone Crusher Giant and Lightning Bolt can't always reach. So if I were going to play it, I would go a little bit lighter on the discard package, which is hard to make work in multiplayer. And then I would add 3 Soul Shatters and 2 Bone Dragons, and then you're fine to shuffle up in a big game. So that's it for the deck. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll post a link to the deck on MTG Goldfish down below as well. Now, I also want to know if any of you were going around playing non-EDH casual formats before the pandemic hit, or if you're doing it now via webcam. So let me know what kind of games you're playing, because I'm always interested in highlighting other fun, quick ways to play the game. So until the next video, this has been the Salty Sea, and have fun shuffling.